Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at Time Cut.
Time Cut.
A brand new, just came out last week, actually. Teen slasher flick. Got time travel, serial killer. You know, sometimes you just need that
Oh, absolutely.
popcorn movie, right?
Yeah.
So we've got the IMDb page up, and it's amazing, even with just a simple movie page,
Right.
how much you can actually learn about a film.
Well, what jumps out at me right away is that it's sitting at a 5.1 out of 10 on IMDb.
Correct.
With almost 5,000 user ratings. So not exactly soaring, but, not unheard of.
Right.
For this type of movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of puts it in that, like,
Yeah.
it's okay, but not amazing zone.
It's like a rental, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like a
Tuesday night.
Yeah, Tuesday night, exactly. Like I don't need to rush out to the theater to see this, but if it's on, streaming or whatever,
Sure.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. What do you think that says about, especially for a horror film,
Yeah.
what does that kind of rating say about it?
Horror fans are a tough crowd.
They are.
And I think a 5.1 suggests that it probably delivers on the basics. Like you're going to get some scares, you'll get a little bit of gore, maybe a few twists and turns, but it's probably not doing anything particularly new or memorable.
Gotcha.
And a lot of horror films fall into that category. Like they're entertaining enough for a one-time watch, but they don't necessarily stick with you.
All right. That makes sense. So let's get into the plot.
Okay.
High school student goes back to 2003 to stop a serial killer who murdered her sister. So you've got that classic revenge element, but then blended with, always fun time travel.
Which time travel always makes things more interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's like, well, what if you could actually go back and change something? Right? Like that's a theme that we always come back to. Yeah.
And you see it in so many different genres and types of films.
Totally. And it really makes you wonder, what would you do if you could go back and change something?
Yeah.
Knowing.
Right. Because there's always consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Always consequences. Speaking of things that might have consequences, let's talk about the goof section on the IMDb page.
Oh, always fun.
Always a fun section. One user actually pointed out a potential plot hole. So it has to do with the main character's cell phone. Because the movie's set in 2003, and this person pointed out that even though, 2G isn't as widely used in the US anymore, most modern phones can still connect to it because it's still used in other countries.
Right.
So theoretically, the protagonist still should have been able to get a signal, even if they didn't have service. So it's like,
I never thought about that, but that makes sense because it's out there, It is. It's interesting. I mean, that's the kind of thing, and I was thinking about it too, like, how many people would actually pick up on that?
It's like, you got to be a real tech enthusiast to even notice that.
Right, exactly.
But it does highlight the challenges, right? Like for filmmakers to really portray technology accurately. Especially in a time travel setting.
Yeah, because then you've got these, two different eras, and it's got to all make sense. I think for most people, it's not even going to register. They're more caught up in the story and the characters. And
you just kind of, suspend your disbelief a little bit and just go along for the ride.
Right, exactly. All right, well, let's move on to something a little less technical and a little more fun. The soundtrack.
All right, I like it.
So apparently, Time Cut features What's Love by Fat Joe, featuring Ashanti and Ja Rule.
Oh, wow. Okay. Throwback.
Now, that is a guaranteed earworm for anyone who remembers the early 2000s.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, come on.
That'll get stuck in your head.
Oh, absolutely.
For days.
So, I mean, even if the movie itself isn't like a masterpiece, the soundtrack might be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack alone can transport you back to a certain time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes you hear a song and you're instantly back in high school or...
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Speaking of memorable or not, let's see what some of the viewers are actually saying.
Okay.
One of the featured user reviews on IMDb, they gave it a 3 out of 10.
Oof.
But they did praise the soundtrack.
Okay.
Called the plot and dialogue cheesy.
Okay.
But they also questioned some of the time travel logic.
Right.
And to be fair.
Which is fair, yeah.
That's a common,
it's a common complaint.
Complaint with time travel movies.
Time travel is so tricky to get right. There's always going to be some inconsistencies.
It's almost impossible to make it.
It's almost impossible.
Perfectly airtight, right?
Yeah.
Without running into some paradoxes.
Yeah. You're always going to find something. Like if you think about it hard enough, you're going to be like, well, wait a minute.
But that's part of the fun, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Is like trying to figure it out.
Right.
And debating like the what ifs.
It's all part of the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a mental exercise.
There you go. Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got a movie here, mixed reviews.
Yeah.
But at least a killer soundtrack.
Fans like it.
Might spark some interesting time travel debates.
Yeah, that's always fun.
So I'm curious to see what else we can kind of uncover as we keep digging into Time Cut.
Yeah, me too. It's funny that user called out the cheesy dialogue, because that can sometimes be a deliberate choice in horror films,
Right.
especially ones that kind of lean into that, that slasher subgenre.
Oh, for sure.
Like it's almost a trope.
Yeah, totally. In itself.
Right.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it adds to the campy fun of it, and sometimes it's just like, oh.
Yeah, it's a fine line between intentional cheesiness that's entertaining and just bad writing.
Right. Right.
But it often leads to like some really great quotable lines that people remember.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they become part of the movie's legacy.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes those cheesy lines are the most memorable parts, even if it's for all the wrong reasons. But let's get back to the time travel element here.
Okay.
I mean, we've talked about how it's almost impossible to make it perfectly logical.
Right.
But what about the emotional impact?
Right.
Like, what do you think makes a time travel story really connect with people?
I think for me, it comes down to the human element.
Okay.
It's not just about the mechanics of time travel.
Uh-huh.
Like how does it work and the science behind it. It's really about the characters and their motivations.
Yeah. Like, why are they going back in time? What are the stakes? What are they hoping to achieve? And if we can connect with those characters on an emotional level, then we're more willing to overlook maybe some of those logical inconsistencies.
Right. Like you kind of just buy into it a little bit more.
Yeah, you're invested in the journey, even if the journey is bending the rules of time and space a little bit.
And it seems like Time Cut has that classic setup of, a young woman driven by grief.
Yeah.
And just wanting justice for what happened. I mean, that's a pretty powerful.
It's a classic motivator, right? Like, and that theme of wanting to change the past, wanting to undo a tragedy.
Right.
I mean, that's something that I think resonates with so many people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we all have moments in our lives, right?
Right.
Where we're like, man, if I could just go back and change that one thing.
Totally.
Or that one choice, or prevent that one.
Yeah.
Awful event from happening.
Yeah.
Time travel stories, they give us a way to kind of explore those possibilities,
right.
even if it's just in this fictional setting.
Yeah. It's like wish fulfillment, but then it also forces you to confront the other side of it.
Exactly. Because every action has a reaction.
Right.
And that's the thing about time travel, right? Is like, you make one little change.
Yeah.
Who knows what the ripple effects are going to be?
Which kind of brings us back to that question we posed earlier. Like, would you...
A good question.
Yeah. Would you try to change things if you could?
I mean, it's a question that has fascinated people for centuries. And I don't think there's any easy answer to it.
Right.
But it is worth asking ourselves, like, what are those things in our own lives that we might be tempted to change? Okay. And what would be the ripple effects? Like, would we even be here if we change that one thing? It's interesting to think about.
It's a really thought-provoking question.
Uh-huh.
It's amazing to me how a movie like Time Cut, I mean, on the surface, it's like, your typical slasher flick.
Right.
But then you get into these deeper conversations about like regret and responsibility.
Right.
And just the nature of time itself.
Yeah, it's really about the choices we make, right?
Yeah.
And how those choices shape who we are.
Totally. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about the plot and the time travel aspect, the deeper meaning. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the cast.
All right.
So we've got Madison Bailey and Antonia Gentry, both rising stars.
Oh, yeah, I've seen them in some stuff.
And then the more veteran presence of Michael Shanks in there.
Okay, nice mix, yeah.
What do you think about that? Like, how that particular mix of actors might have influenced the film?
Well, I think casting can definitely play a big role in how a film is received.
Right.
And I think in this case, it seems like they were going for like a balance of fresh faces and experience. You know, like Bailey and Gentry, they appeal to like, a younger demographic.
Yeah.
And then you bring in Shanks and it's like, well, maybe he draws in some viewers who are familiar with his previous work.
Right. You got like two different generations going on there.
Right. You're trying to broaden the appeal, like get as many people as possible interested in seeing it.
And it's interesting to think about how, those different actors with their different backgrounds would have approached their roles.
Right.
Especially in a genre film like this.
Especially in a genre film.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That, speaking of which, I was reading something on the IMDb page, and this is really interesting and also kind of tragic, but cinematographer Helena Hutchins.
Oh, wow.
She actually worked on this film before her tragic death on Rust.
Yeah, that was so awful.
I mean, it's just it's a sobering reminder, I think, of the risks that are involved in filmmaking sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think it just underscores how important safety is on set.
Yeah.
I mean, and she was a talented cinematographer. And, I think her loss is a reminder that, this is not all, glamour and fun. Like, things can happen.
It's a real job with real risks involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a terrible situation.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be forgotten. But moving on, let's talk about the soundtrack a little bit more.
All right.
I mean, we talked about What's Love being in there, which
that's a good one.
That major nostalgia hit.
Throwback.
But what else is going on with the music?
Well, I mean, looking at the full track list, it seems like they've curated a mix of like early 2000s hip hop and R&B.
Oh, okay.
Which, perfectly complements the time period the movie is set in.
So they're really leaning into that nostalgia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a smart move, especially for, a genre film like this. I mean, music can be such a powerful tool, right? For evoking emotions, memories. And in this case, it really helps to create a specific atmosphere and tone.
Yeah, for sure. I could already imagine like some of the songs playing during some of those key scenes.
Yeah.
Amping up the suspense or
setting the mood. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's all about creating that cohesive experience for the viewer. And it seems like the music is playing a big part in that.
Big part of that.
So we've got this time travel slasher flick. Got a solid cast, killer soundtrack.
Right.
And the potential for some
super themes.
Some deeper themes to be explored. I'm ready to see how all comes together in the final act.
Me too.
I feel like we've kind of uncovered some interesting layers to Time Cut, even if it's not, like an award winner or anything.
And that's what's so fun about these deep dives, right? Like you can find, these little nuggets of insight or, just things to think about, even in, like you said, a film that, maybe isn't going to win any Oscars.
Right. Exactly. I mean, we've talked about, the plot, the acting, the music, even the technical goofs.
Right, right.
But I think there's something else going on here too. Oh, something that maybe like connects to our broader, our culture, our society.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, Time Cut, with its time travel element in the setting in the early 2000s.
Right.
I think it really taps into our current obsession with nostalgia.
It does.
We are...
Oh, for sure.
We are bombarded with it constantly.
Yeah.
Reboots, remakes, throwbacks to earlier decades.
Uh-huh.
I mean, social media is just filled with people, Oh, yeah.
Reminiscing about, the good old days.
The good old days, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think's driving all that? Like, why are we...
It's a good question. I think, part of it is that we're living in a time of just like rapid change and uncertainty, right? Like the world just feels chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah.
And so looking back at a simpler time.
Yeah.
Even if we're looking back through, rose-colored glasses.
Right. Yeah.
It can be comforting.
Yeah.
It kind of offers a sense of stability and familiarity.
Right. It's like a known quantity.
Exactly.
So even if it's not, necessarily accurate, it still feels...
It feels good.
Good. Yeah. And it ties back into, the whole appeal of time travel too.
Totally.
I mean, it's not just about revisiting the past. Okay. It's also about the fantasy of being able to change it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said earlier.
If I could just go back and tweak this one thing.
Right, right. And in Time Cut, the protagonist's whole motivation is preventing her sister's murder, right?
Right.
That's pretty heavy.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a prime example of how time travel can be used to explore these ideas of grief and loss and
right, and like second chances.
Second chances, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it resonates with people because we all have those,
Oh, yeah.
those regrets.
Yeah.
Things we wish we could undo.
Absolutely.
Time travel, at least in stories, gives us a way to kind of
explore those possibilities.
Explore that a little bit, even if it's not real.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, Time Cut, it might be a genre film.
Yeah.
It might have its, its cliches and its plot holes.
Right.
But it's also like tapping into some of these anxieties that we all kind of
Peeper anxieties.
Yeah, exactly. About, how we relate to the past and our hopes for the future and
right, the choices that we make.
The choices we make. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I don't know about you, but I think I think Time Cut has earned a spot on my watch list.
Yeah, it sounds like it's at least worth checking out.
Yeah, exactly. So to our listeners out there, if you're looking for a thought-provoking deep dive
You're right.
into a movie that might be more than meets the eye,
Yeah.
check out Time Cut.
Give it a shot.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
You never know.
You never know. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
On this deep dive of Time Cut. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration.
Looking forward to it.
The world of film.
Yeah, me too.